Hey everyone, this is Will. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Bali, Indonesia as a digital nomad, or just in general, if you want to travel or stay there for a little bit longer. I'm going to try and cover all of the different aspects of life in Bali that you might be interested in, from accommodation to community, going out, co-working spaces, food, pretty much everything. By the way, if you're interested in digital marketing, online business, all of that kind of stuff, make sure to check out the links in the description. I have some very useful freebies. Now let's jump into it. So probably the first thing that you need to understand about Bali is basically what the layout is like. Where exactly do you want to stay? Because there are a few different areas. So first of all, when you land at the airport, next to the airport, there is an area called Kuta. And then Kuta, as you're going up north, going up from the airport, if you're looking at the map, then after that you have Seminyak, and then you have Canggu when you go a little bit further. So Kuta is, how to put this nicely without insulting anyone, it's a place where a lot of backpackers basically come just to get wasted and to party, and it's not really an area that I would suggest to stay at all whatsoever. And Seminyak, I would say, is just a little bit more upscale, but it's pretty much kind of the same thing as well. On the other hand, if you go a little bit above, you have Canggu, and then if you go a little bit north as well, there are some new up and coming areas. But Canggu is, I would describe it as a little bit more sort of hipster place where you will have a lot of really nice cafes, very nice restaurants. People look very different in Canggu than they do in Kuta or Seminyak. And in Canggu as well, you do have some co-working spaces. You have a lot of digital nomads. I would say most of the digital nomads actually stay in Canggu. And also just expats that in general just stay in Bali for a longer time, maybe live in Bali. Most of the time, most of them do stay in Canggu as well. Aside from that, I would say there are a couple more areas that are very popular as well. So the next one, the second probably biggest one, is Ubud. So Ubud is a little bit further up north. It's sort of almost more or less in the middle of the island, not really, but it's basically in the jungle. So Canggu is by the beach, by the way, so you can surf in Canggu, and Ubud is within the jungle, and Ubud is really sort of the yogi paradise. So if you are into yoga, if you are into just meditation, vegan food, whatever it is, that's sort of the place that you want to be in Bali. So you still have a bunch of really amazing cafes, you have some amazing restaurants and all of that, but it is a little bit different type of lifestyle in Ubud. You will not get as much of these crazy parties that you might have in Canggu, and a lot of people that you will meet in Ubud, as I said, a lot of those people, they're going to be yogis, they might be very spiritual. I mean, there are all kinds of people, but I'm talking just in majority term. Aside from Ubud, if you go all the way down south to sort of the Bukit Peninsula, you have the Uluwatu Bukit area, which is just really amazing white sand beaches. So these are just amazing, beautiful beaches because yes, you do have a beach in Canggu. However, that beach is dark sand and it's not really the nicest beach, to be honest. But if you go down south, especially if you go to the west side, you will have some very, very nice beaches that have amazing waves as well. So this is where a lot of people go just for surfing. And if you go to the little bit more of an east area, the southeast, you have Sonora, which is, you don't really have as many waves on that side of the island. It all depends, by the way, on the seasons. You have different seasons, but there you have a little bit more sort of family, I would say, vibe, and it's not as busy. So basically there are three different areas that I personally recommend. That is, as I mentioned, Canggu, which is more sort of hipster. You got your surfing, you got your parties, you got a lot of digital nomads, a lot of co-working spaces. This is where I spent most of my time. I absolutely love Canggu. After that, you have Ubud. As I said, a little bit more spiritual, yogi, more jungle vibe. You don't have water right next to you. Ubud, it's still absolutely amazing. I've done bazillion trips to Ubud and I absolutely love it. And if you go down south in the Uluwatu, the Bukit area, you have some very beautiful beaches. However, I honestly don't know if you have, well, they started opening up a couple of co-working spaces, but you definitely don't have as much of a digital nomad community down south, but it's absolutely amazing if you are really into surfing. Another little bonus, just in general, if you will want to travel, I'm mentioning these areas where basically you might want to stay long term and live there for at least a month or so, but there are other additional areas. Definitely if you go a little bit more up north, northeast, you have some amazing white sand beaches that are actually not that crowded. Some of my favorite beaches actually I found there that are not so touristy. If you go all the way up north, you also have some amazing snorkeling, you can do some diving, and you have completely different beaches. So there are other areas, but these are the areas that I recommend if you're going to come for a little bit longer. So let's talk community. One thing that I think is so essential for any digital nomad, and Bali is, I would honestly say, it's the capital of digital nomads. I know a lot of people talk about Thailand, Chiang Mai and all of that, but honestly when I went to Chiang Mai, I did not see as many digital nomads as I saw in Bali. There might be the numbers, they might be hiding somewhere, but I definitely felt it a lot more in Bali, and it was, in general, I would say, more interesting people as well. So the community is, I would say, really good. As I mentioned, there's a lot of co-working spaces, it's very easy to meet people, and for me personally, I think this is probably one of the best places in the world in terms of community. Next thing is accommodation. So when it comes to Bali, accommodation is a little bit interesting because you don't really have apartment buildings as you would have in let's say a city. So what's more common in Bali, or even in Thailand actually, in a lot of places in Thailand you have apartments, even if it's a beach town. But in Bali, it's not really very common. So usually people rent villas. There are some homestays that you can do, but most of the time I would say people rent out a villa, and sometimes you can either basically rent a villa, the whole villa for yourself, or a lot of people actually what they like to do is they rent out a villa and then they rent out rooms to different people. So basically they share a big villa with someone. So honestly, it really depends where exactly in Bali you're going to be staying. If you're staying in Canggu, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, and also depending how close to main attractions you are, how close to the beach you are. If you're a little bit further, just 10-15 minutes in Bali, that's quite a lot, even though in a big city that's nothing, but the price can drop drastically. Also, if you are in Ubud is a little bit cheaper than Canggu, and Uluwatu as well, I would say in general terms is a little bit cheaper. So if you want a really budget option, then you can go, as I mentioned, for a homestay, and you can find some homestays for super cheap price, maybe $200-300 a month. It's not going to be the nicest or anything like that. If you want to find maybe a room in a villa that is a shared villa, usually those go around from, I would say, $400 to $700 depending on the location and how nice the villa is and all of that. And honestly, what you get for the price is absolutely amazing. And if you want to rent out a villa, so this is where it's a little bit tricky, because what it used to be is that if you want to rent a villa, to rent it monthly used to be very difficult. So you would need to pay the whole one big amount for the whole year, and then you get your villa. But it seems that these days, because of what's happening in the world and because they don't have as many tourists, Now it seems that it's more likely that you can find a villa that you can rent out monthly, and the prices right now, they have dropped quite a bit as well. So if you want to rent a villa, it's probably going to start somewhere from 1200, 1500. Again, this is probably the starting price for a couple bedroom villa, depending on exactly where you want it and how nice you want it and so on. But in general, when it comes to accommodation in Bali, I absolutely love accommodation in Bali. I don't know what it is. There's some kind of design that they use and aesthetics that they have in Bali. Obviously, you have the super ratchet looking places, but if you look at the little bit nicer places, the value that you get for money, I think is absolutely amazing. Next thing is food. So when it comes to Balinese food, I personally really like it. You do have, I would say, somewhat limited amount of options compared to something, let's say if you're in Thailand, you have definitely way more different options to choose from. But the basic food is, I would say for me, it's pretty good and it's extremely cheap. So again, it depends where exactly you are eating the food, but in general, if you're eating local food, you can get food for as cheap as $1, $2, $3. When it comes to Western food, there's quite a bit of a difference, and Bali is, one of the things about Bali is because it's such a popular destination, it's being, I would say, very much westernized. So you do have a ton, and I really mean a ton of different restaurants to choose from, and a lot of them, they are, I would say, very hipster, very nice and all of that, and the price is actually not even that cheap. And again, it depends. You can find some restaurants that are Western restaurants and they're actually still very affordable, but at the same time, one thing about Bali is that the prices definitely, I would say, are or can be on the higher range compared to, let's say, Western stuff in other Southeast Asian countries, but it's also about the price and quality ratio. And when it comes to price and quality ratio, I would say Bali is still definitely very good. But if we look at Western food, I would say in some of the cafes that or restaurants that I like to eat, it would be somewhere, I would say, a little bit closer to maybe from $5 to $8, around somewhere there. Now, co-working spaces. When it comes to co-working spaces, Bali has a lot of them. As I mentioned, I think Bali is the #1 place for digital nomads and all of that, and they build out a lot of co-working spaces. So you definitely have to choose from, and some of the co-working spaces, so the co-working space that I joined Bali when I first came was Dojo, which I absolutely love this co-working space, and why it actually stood out quite a lot from, I've been to many countries now and many different co-working spaces, and it's probably the best co-working space I've ever been to. And this is not endorsed, I wish it was, but it's not. So one thing about this co-working space, and I don't know if this is all of the co-working spaces in Bali, but there was quite a bit of emphasis on the community. So there were a lot of events that allow you to easily meet other people. You have members breakfast, you have members lunch, you have some drinks on Friday night, then you have a bunch of events throughout the week where you can share knowledge, you can network with people, so on and so forth. And that is something that I think every co-working space needs to have. So in my opinion, and by the way, the co-working spaces are really, most of them at least in Bali, they are very beautiful as well. And the only thing is that they are, I would say, a little bit more expensive than co-working spaces in some of other Southeast Asian countries in the same region. So a co-working space in Bali is usually around $200 a month, which I would say is a little bit steep. But if you do get this whole community thing and all of that, then I think it's definitely worth it. Next thing is transportation. So when it comes to Bali, transportation is a little bit tricky. So most of the time you are going to rent out a scooter, a bike, whatever it is, and the general sort of scooter Vario costs around $50 a month, which is actually really, really good. And sometimes, let's say if you're going out or something, you might not want to be driving. Oh, by the way, gas is very cheap as well. You're not gonna spend much, maybe an additional $10. When you don't want to drive and you want to get a cab, again, because it's an island, you definitely don't have any public transportation or anything like that. You do have taxis and you do have Uber and you have sort of the local Uber as well. However, the problem within Bali is that the local taxi drivers, they don't like Uber. So a lot of times you might not actually be able to get a taxi at, well, not taxi, but Uber, let's say, at the exact place where you are, because there are certain areas where they can't really come to. If you're in, let's say, the very sort of central area in Canggu, it's known basically that you're not going to get Uber there, and the taxi drivers, they're going to try to overcharge you, maybe charge you 5 times more than usual. That's why you actually see a lot of drinking and driving in Bali, which I definitely don't suggest because traffic can be pretty hectic and you get so many accidents in Bali, so many. So try definitely not to do that. But in general, if you do manage to get a taxi or Uber or the local app, then it's actually very, very cheap and very affordable. It's not going to cost much, but in general, I definitely advise to start learning how to drive a scooter or a bike. And by the way, if you want to go on some trips, let's say like a daily trip or something like that, and you want to get a driver, it's actually very cheap in Bali as well. You can get a car that's going to take you anywhere within the island. I think you get around maybe 8 to 10 hours of private driver, and that's going to cost you around $50. Do keep in mind that there are some traffic jams, and sometimes being in a car actually can take you much longer than if you are driving on a bike. By the way, if you want to travel within Bali, so if let's say you're based in Canggu, you want to drive to Ubud, it's going to take you around 1 hour, and if you want to go down south, depends where exactly you're going as well, but it's going to be more or less 1 hour as well. Only if you're going a little bit further above Ubud, up north, then I think to cross the whole island, as far as I remember, it takes you around maybe 3 hours. Next thing is entertainment and going out. So it really depends where exactly you are. Again, if you are in Canggu or you're in Ubud or you're in the Uluwatu sort of area, there might not be certain things. For example, if you want to go watch a movie, you're not going to find a cinema in Canggu, at least last time I checked. You will need to go to the Kuta area where they have shopping malls and they have cinemas and all of that kind of stuff. Or you can go to Denpasar, which is sort of the big city within Bali. It's not a big city actually, but it's sort of more of a city within Bali, and there you can find more of the different things you might want to do. In general, I would say everything is pretty affordable. It's similar to any Southeast Asian country. If we're talking about nightlife and going out, it's a little bit different case. I would say Bali is definitely more expensive than most of, let's say if you compare it to neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, because Indonesia itself, it's a Muslim country, even though Bali is not, but I think there is still quite a bit of tax on alcohol. So when it comes to drinks, you definitely don't expect to have some very cheap drinks, and sometimes they do have special promotions. However, I would not suggest drinking that alcohol. If it looks too good to be true, then probably you should not do that. They probably have some alcohol that they put into mixing the drinks that is actually not good for your health, and you can get poisoning, alcohol poisoning. So I would say try to stick to normal international drinks. But in general, if you want to get, let's say, a small beer, is going to be around, depending on the place, it really depends. You're going to pay maybe a couple of dollars. A cocktail might be closer to maybe $5 to $7. So it's not the cheapest. When you look at, let's say, European countries, it might be around the same, but if we compare it to, again, Southeast Asia, it's definitely on the higher price. And it really depends where exactly you go as well, because as I mentioned, for example, if you are in Canggu, you have some bars and restaurants that are really upscale or really hipster or whatever, and especially if they're, let's say, right on the beach, then the prices can go up quite a bit. Next thing is general goods. So when, let's say, you want to buy clothes or you want to do some shopping for your home, in general, I would say it's not very cheap, it's not very expensive, it's more or less kind of the same. I wouldn't really, well, they do have some local clothes and things like that that you can buy. I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of those. You can buy them very cheap and you will see a lot of tourists buying those t-shirts and all of that. But in general, you do have some international brands as well if you go to one of the malls in Kuta or Denpasar. And when it comes to food, one thing, this is I guess kind of the case anywhere in Southeast Asia, you don't have as much of a choice of Western foods. So you do have those local little supermarkets, you have just some people selling vegetables, and those are super extremely cheap and good quality and all of that because they come directly from the farms. But if you want something Western, so what I'm talking about is, let's say, you want some good cheese, you want some meats, you want some dark chocolate, things like that are going to be a lot more expensive. I would say expect to pay double, if not triple, from what you pay back home. For example, I love brie cheese, and brie cheese, I used to pay for the brie cheese that I get back home for €1, $1.50. In Bali, I would pay $5 for the same cheese. Also, same thing applies for alcohol. As I mentioned, alcohol is pretty expensive, and when you go to purchase alcohol at a store, do expect to pay double or triple of what you would pay back home. That's why usually whenever someone comes to Bali, they bring as much booze as they can. Next thing is climate. So climate does differ a little bit depending on where you are in Bali. If you go a little bit down south, it doesn't rain as much. If you go a little bit towards more up north, it rains a little bit more. There isn't a huge difference. So in general, it is very, very hot in Bali. It's usually somewhere around 30 degrees Celsius or 80 to 90 Fahrenheit during the day. During the night it drops, but it really doesn't drop much. It just drops a couple degrees and that is it. So it's pretty much always just t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops type of weather, and it's also very, very humid in Bali. So whenever you go out, you start sweating right away. I would say this is one of probably the main downsides. Even though I love hot weather, it would be nice that it wouldn't be so sweaty. Aside from that, you also have basically two seasons. You have the dry season and you have the rainy season. So the rainy season, technically, I believe it's supposed to start from around November until around February. But it really kind of depends, I would say. Sometimes it starts in December, sometimes even at the very end of December, but somewhere around that time, you can expect quite a bit of rain. But actually, if you look at the stats of what is the rainfall, the amount of rainfall in Bali, it doesn't look too bad. However, when you actually are in Bali during the rainy season, what happens is when it rains, it really rains. It's that tropical rain. So it might just, it might be sunny one second and next second is just crazy raining, and you're going to get completely soaked in just a couple of minutes. So I would say during the rainy season, you either have some days that are pretty decent, good sunny days, or you have just completely crazy weather. But honestly, I have stayed in Bali during all of the seasons, the rainy season, the dry season, a couple of times actually. I actually spent couple of years in Bali altogether, and it's not the worst actually. A lot of places definitely are a lot worse. I would say the rainy season is definitely manageable in Bali. Next is internet and phone, and this is where it's a little bit tricky because Bali has been changing a lot in the past few years. So when I first came, it was really difficult to find good internet, but now more and more homes are starting to get fiber internet, and it really depends, but I would say now you can expect to have around, let's say, 40 megabytes speed at your home, and if you go to a co-working space, you can find much faster speeds if you really need something that is much faster. Also, you can use data on your mobile phone, and it's pretty good as well, pretty reliable if you're not in the middle of nowhere, and it's actually very cheap as well. It's around maybe just $5 for 10 or 12 gigabytes. Next thing is safety. So when it comes to Bali, in general, I never really had any issues myself, but I have heard a few stories where people did have someone break into their villa. I don't think it happens that often, honestly, but I have heard some stories, and I have seen some posts on Facebook where you did have some robberies, and usually that would happen in the middle of the night and usually towards girls. So if you are a female and you're, let's say, you have your bag on your shoulder and you're driving in the middle of the night, there's no one around, then that might not be the safest option. I would advise not to do that. Sometimes I would actually escort my friends to their home if it's middle of the night and they don't really feel that comfortable. And I have heard people actually getting their phones snatched sometimes. So, you know, sometimes people would put their phone in front of the scooter to see where they're driving, to see their GPS. So unless you really put it in there firmly, be careful, because sometimes you might get it snatched. So there are these small, I would say, pickpocketing, small thefts, but in general, I wouldn't say that Bali is not a safe place. So now let's talk overall costs of staying in Bali. So the one interesting thing, what I kind of mentioned a couple of times already, is that Bali has so much Western influence. There are so many bars, restaurants, cafes that are really amazing in terms of how they look, in terms of food and all of that, but also that does come with a price. So while you can get, for example, some very cheap local food for as cheap as $1 or $2, you can also pay exactly same prices as, let's say, you would pay in Europe or US for your meals. So it really depends so much. I would say Bali is probably, it has the biggest difference, I would say, out of all the Southeast Asian countries, just in terms of how much more there is of these more upscale places. So honestly, your budget really depends so vastly, because as I said, you can stay in a guest house, you can just eat local food and pretty much spend no money. But at the same time, you can stay in a villa, and a really nice villa. You can go out, eat amazing food, and also if you go out, you're going to definitely spend more money if you're drinking and all of that kind of stuff. So it can depend vastly. But just to give you an understanding, in general terms, a lot of people, I know they have this idea of, I want to spend $1,000. I would say that technically you can definitely do it. Would it actually make sense? I would say it kind of would make sense, but I would say it would be a little bit tight in Bali. I would say maybe the minimum should be a little bit more, maybe around 1,200. So when you compare it to some other Southeast Asian countries, if you compare it to Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Bali is definitely, I would say, the more expensive option. And if you want to spend more money, if you want to be really comfortable, again, it depends on so many different factors, because just accommodation can be, 1,500 or 2,000 depending on what you want. But in general, I would say that the quality that you're going to get for the cost, for the money that you're paying, is probably one of the best out there in the world. When it comes to visas, this is changing now quite a bit because Bali has been open, it has been closed, you need to quarantine. The quarantine is 2 days, it's 7 days, it really depends. In general terms, before you could come, usually for most countries, you could come without a visa, then you could extend it, and if you wanted, you could get a social visa that allows you to stay for half a year. Now it seems that if you're a digital nomad, they're working on digital nomad visa, and it seems that most likely you can also get business visa that is going to allow you to stay for a longer period. It seems that Bali and Balinese government is going towards that, and you'll probably need to pay few hundred dollars for that visa, but that's probably going to allow you to stay for half a year or 1 year in Bali. When it comes to English, I would say that level of English in Indonesia and Bali is, I would say, very, very good. A lot of, don't expect everyone to speak English. A lot of, especially older people, of course, they're not going to speak English, but you will be surprised, I think, how many people speak English if you compare it to other countries in Southeast Asia. And one thing that made it a little bit different for me, my experience in Bali, is that I actually made local Balinese friends, which usually is honestly very difficult to do if you are, let's say, somewhere in Vietnam or Thailand, because simply there is a huge language barrier. But in Bali, I would say in general, it's a little bit better. So now, overall vibe in Bali, what life in Bali is like. So personally, Bali for me is one of my favorite places in the world. I absolutely love Bali. It is sort of an island life, but then again, you pretty much have everything that you might need. You have amazing food, you have local food, you have amazing Western restaurants, cafes, all of that. You have amazing nightlife, you have co-working spaces, you have a bunch of different things to do. So in Bali, you have a lot of different waterfalls you can go to, bazillion different beaches. You can go to some islands nearby for day trips or weekend trips. So there's quite a bit of actually just sightseeing to do. And if you love surfing like me, then surfing in Bali is absolutely amazing. Water is always very, very warm. You don't need a wetsuit or anything like that. Balinese people are very, very nice people, and again, you have a ton of different foreigners, and so it's very easy to meet people and easy to meet like-minded people as well. Everyone's very chill, very open. The one downside probably of this is that it is really touristy these days. So it might have changed now because now you have restrictions of how exactly you can come to Bali and all of that, and these things are going to change. But in general, before the pandemic, it was becoming insanely touristy, honestly, to a point where it was almost too touristy. But at the same time, there are so many upsides that I think this downside of it being crowded and being touristy, probably all of these upsides do weigh it out. All right, so I hope you found this useful. If you're listening to this as a podcast, take the title, put it on YouTube, find the video, and if you have any questions, leave those questions in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as I can. If you think I forgot something, then do leave that in the comment section as well. As I said, if you are interested in digital marketing, digital nomad lifestyle, online business, all that kind of stuff, check out all of the links in the description. There are some amazing freebies and whatnot. Also, make sure to check out my Instagram account as well. If you found this useful, make sure to smash the thumbs up button, put on those notifications. Stay awesome, and I'll see you soon.